Quite interesting.
Maybe I misunderstood you, but I thought there was a tool shed or something.
That was up
property.
across Indian Creek.
Okay.
Now, when my folks lived there for quite a while, they always felt as though they wanted a bigger chunk of ground and something with trees, and they liked the idea of water, and they found a chunk of ground that was 200 feet wide by 500 and some odd feet in depth, and it ended up in Indian Creek off of Carroll Drive. And they bought this property and then proceeded to build a little 4-room cottage on this and had a well drilled, and it made a nice place to spend the summer days and time. And Grant Wood and his mother loved to come up there and spend time. And then they decided to build a building down the hill a little ways away from the cottage that was probably, I'll say, 14 by 20 size or something of that nature. And they called it the shop because Grant liked to hammer out copper work, and my dad liked to do all sorts of woodworking. He had a lathe and so forth and carving tools, and they'd spend their spare time there. And an interesting sideline of this is that Grant decided it should have a hip roof on the entrance to this building, and my dad was not familiar with how to make a hip roof, so they made the outhouse and had a hip roof on the outhouse, and it worked out pretty good. And they built the front entrance, and then my dad put what we called a Dutch door. The upper half would open, and the lower half could stay closed if you wanted, and keep the cat out or the chickens or anything else. But they spent a great deal of time between the little summer cottage and the shop, and it stayed in place long after we built a permanent home up there.
And young Don got to use it as a
then later
in life,
later in life, my mother complained about the fact that I could, with my circular saw and my jigsaw and a few other tools, I could make a mess. So she suggested I take all my tools and put them in the summer cottage, and that gathered more friends than you can imagine, because in the evenings there'd be somebody making fudge in the kitchen and someone else carving a propeller to fit on a motorcycle engine in the living room, and what a bunch of fun we had.
Yeah. Where was the favorite swimming hole back in that period?
We would go in Indian Creek, of course, and I knew Indian Creek from one end to the other, and but a favorite swimming place was at the far south end of the Cedar Rapids Country Club, and we called it Yellow Banks because of the yellow sand on this great big cliff. But it made a sharp turn there, and it was rather deep, and we didn't have to bother about swimming trunks. In those days, we could just swim there whenever we wanted to.
There's always a lot of stories, old stories about Cook's Pond that
Yes.
a lot of people used to go out there.
Oh, yes. Yeah, the family, at one time we had a horse and buggy, and we would go out there quite often. And on the way, we would pass different people that had vegetables and watermelons and so forth for sale. And so we did a lot of things. But it was an ideal spot, and it's now the lake belonging to Tom Riley.
Tom and Nancy Riley.
Yes. Yeah. And out in the middle, it was spring-fed, and when you'd swim, it was mostly mud bottom. But this was one area where the spring was. You could lower your feet down, and you could actually feel that bitter cold water coming up. And it made an ideal place to.
This was the place where Mr. LaChote built a mansion out there?
Yes, he built that mansion.
Was that mansion there when you remember going out there as a young boy?
No, there was nothing there. And I don't know who owned the land We call it Cook's Pond, so I suppose a man by the name of Cook, but there was never any restrictions about going in there, and people seemed to respect the property, and there was loads of people would come there for picnics and so on.
And you were telling me a story about Grant Wood.
Oh, yes.
A kettle on his head and full of mud. And
one of the stories